So we notice this, tannins are astringent. So when you drink your red wine or you eat a cranberry, you get that puckering sensation in your mouth, right? That's due to tannins binding proteins in your saliva, okay, that gives you that puckering sensation. Well, these tannins do the same thing in the human body. They bind to proteins so they can actually inhibit enzymes, so they can inhibit deleterious enzymes that play a role in chronic disease. And the last thing that these flavonoids can do, and you can see the structure in the lower right-hand corner, due to these hydroxyl groups, OH groups, they can sequester or bind metals. We don't want pro-oxidant metals like iron and copper floating around at high concentration in the human body. So we know that these flavonoid molecules can bind or sequester and tie up these pro-oxidant metals. Next slide, Jamie. So the anthocyanins are very important because they're potent antioxidants. Again, you can see these OH groups. Now, the structure of these compounds really impacts their bioactivity, okay? So not all anthocyanins are the same. So if you look at this R1 down here and R2, if they have OH groups, the ones that have more OH groups like delphinidin are going to be better antioxidants, okay, than, for example, malvidin that has these methoxy groups. Probably too much chemistry, but the bottom line is the structure of the compound can greatly impact its bioactivity. And it also impacts color, okay? So pelargonidin is more red, found in strawberries, so it just has hydrogens at R1 and R2. And then cyanidin has an OH and an H. So you can see the color varies due to the structure of the anthocyanin. The other neat thing about anthocyanins is the color is impacted by pH or degree of acidity. At a low pH, anthocyanins are red, and as we increase the pH, they start going to blue and green, but they're very unstable at a high pH. For example, the pH in the human body it's around 7. Anthocyanins are not happy at all at physiological pH. They break down into simple phenolics, so they lose their native structure. Next slide, Jamie. Now these tannins are complex molecules. Let's not focus on the chemistry, but just look at the size of these compounds. These are not going to be well absorbed in the human body, okay? Usually less than we call a dimer. 2 molecules can be absorbed fairly well, but more than 2 units, like you see here on the right, is not going to be absorbed, which means it's going to go to the colon and be broken down by the gut microflora, okay? We'll talk about that more later. But again, the tannins can bind to proteins or enzymes and inhibit enzymes due to their binding potential. Next slide, Jamie. So again, free radicals. A free radical has an unpaired electron in its outer shell, which you see on the far right here. So all an antioxidant does, and that's why these phenolic compounds are such potent antioxidants, they can readily donate a hydrogen atom or an electron to that free radical, thus stabilizing the free radical. Because this free radical, that's a highly unstable configuration. When it's missing an electron, it will try to steal an electron from a neighboring molecule. So if you do that to a protein or a lipid, this starts a chain reaction of free radicals, okay? So we can get excessive oxidative damage in the human body, including even oxidation of DNA that can lead to mutations and potentially cancer. So phenolic compounds are excellent antioxidants because they have these hydroxyl groups. Next slide. So where do these free radicals come from? Okay. Well, first of all, they come from metabolism. About 1 to 3% of the oxygen we breathe as a result of respiration generates free radicals. UV light generates free radicals, as does ionizing radiation. Unfortunately, smoking generates various free radicals. Air pollution, and inflammation. Actually, free radicals get a bad rap. We would be dead if the body did not produce free radicals. But the problem is when we have an excessive level of free radicals, and that's why it's important that we consume fruits and vegetables and whole grains in our diet so they can help scavenge these free radicals. Next slide. So reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress plays an important role in a whole host of chronic diseases, as you can see here. Typically, it does not initiate the chronic disease, but once we have the disease, we have excessive oxidative stress in the body. So again, it's important to consume antioxidants through the diet in order to control this excessive production of reactive oxygen species, so we can help prevent or lower oxidative stress. You'll see the same slide that shows, instead of reactive oxygen species in the middle here, inflammation, because we know a lot of these same compounds in berries not only protect against oxidative stress initiated by free radicals or reactive oxygen species, but they also function as anti-inflammatory compounds. Next slide, Jamie. So whenever we look at the ranking of antioxidant capacity of fruits and vegetables, berries are beautiful, right? So cranberries highest, plums, blueberries. That's because they contain the highest levels of those anthocyanin pigments. So again, if you're shopping, you just pick the berries that have the highest degree of coloration, right? Whereas the fruit that have less color, peaches, pears, still nutritious, but they don't have the anthocyanin pigments, so they're not going to have the super high antioxidant capacity. Another important principle here is even with apples, of course this would probably be red apples, the anthocyanins are only in the peel. I hear some people say, well, I'm worried about pesticide residues, so I remove the peel. Probably not a good thing, because that's where all the anthocyanin pigments are, at least in an apple. Now, I'll get to this later, but this is just measuring antioxidant capacity in the fruit. That doesn't tell you a whole lot about how these different fruits will act in vivo in the human body. These compounds have to be absorbed in order to function as an antioxidant in the human body. So in vitro results like this, where we're just measuring antioxidant capacity in a test tube, really doesn't tell you what's going to go on in the human body. It's an important principle. Next slide, please. Now, there's also a bunch of different free radicals that the body is exposed to. So you see singlet oxygen, peroxyl, hydroxyl, superoxide, peroxynitrite. A lot of fancy chemical names, but here's a spider plot showing blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries, their ability to protect against these different free radical species. Okay, so you see the blueberry exceptionally well against superoxide and hydroxyl. Strawberries much better against superoxide. And then the blackberries looks fairly similar to the blueberries. So each fruit or vegetable is going to have a different ability to scavenge different free radicals. Okay, so what does that mean? And then the next slide, Jamie. To me, that says we need to eat a variety of fruits and vegetables because each one has different compounds that can scavenge different free radicals. Okay, so to me, smoothies are the best way to go, where you're eating a combination of different fruits and vegetables, because then you're going to be able to scavenge a number of different free radical species, and you're also going to have a very strong anti-inflammatory effect. Because with smoothies, we're not generating any heat that can destroy some of these compounds, so just blending up fresh fruits and vegetables is a beautiful way to go. And we found from some studies, saving the smoothie for 3-4 days in the refrigerator, these compounds are very stable in the refrigerator for 3 to 5 days. You may see a little bit of browning, enzymatic browning, but most of the phenolic compounds are quite stable. Next slide, please. Okay, this was an interesting study done by Dr. Pryor down at the Arkansas Children's Nutrition Center years ago, but he fed human subjects a Western diet, high carb, 60% carb, 30% fat, okay? And then he looked at the antioxidant capacity in the plasma. So in the control subjects, you see the antioxidant capacity goes negative. What does that mean? That means the body is in a pro-oxidative state. Not good. It means we have excessive free radicals in the body, okay? However, if the subjects ate the Western diet, but they included 93 grams of freeze-dried blueberries, they actually see a spike in antioxidant capacity, which is good, 1 hour. So this is when these anthocyanin pigments are being absorbed. So even though they ate the Western diet, the oxidative state or stress never went negative, okay? So it says, well, if you're eating rubbish at McDonald's, at least eat blueberries and you won't go into a pro-oxidative state. Now, the important thing with a lot of these studies is freeze-dried blueberries, 93 grams. If you do the calculation, that's a heck of a lot of fresh blueberries. It's probably over 6 cups a day, okay? So again, with a lot of these studies, you actually have to look at how much was actually fed in order to see a positive effect. Okay, next slide. This is another important slide, because here we're seeing antioxidant intake, okay, and the hazard ratio of a myocardial infarction risk or heart attack. This is interesting because we always hear we're supposed to eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, right? Well, it's interesting when we start seeing the protection against a heart attack, it's at about 12,500 ORAC units. That's at about 5 servings of fruits or vegetables. It's interesting, we don't see much of an additional effect the more that we consume, but this has been a problem for Americans. I think it's still less than 1/3 of the population consumes 5 servings of fruits or vegetables per day. But by doing so, we can reduce our risk of heart attack. Next slide. Next slide. Health benefits beyond antioxidant capacity. Okay, so we talked a lot about antioxidants and oxidative stress. What are some other ways berries protect against chronic diseases? First of all, a lot of these phenolic compounds are potent anti-inflammatory agents. They've also been shown to have protective effects against cognition, Parkinson's, or Alzheimer's, or improve motor skills. They've been shown to protect against various types of cancer. And as we saw on the last slide, they can afford protection against cardiovascular disease and stroke. But they also can act at very low levels at the molecular level where they affect enzyme metabolizing pathways and signal transduction pathways. So you don't have to have a high level of these compounds in the body in order to elicit in some of these important reactions, such as the signaling transduction pathways. Next slide. So inflammation is a major problem. You can see all the different diseases here that inflammation plays a role, especially chronic inflammation. So we know again that these anthocyanin pigments found in berries help control against chronic inflammation. And we're currently looking at volatile compounds in berries. These are the compounds that are responsible, for example, when you smell a strawberry, it has a unique aroma. We're finding that these compounds also are very potent anti-inflammatory compounds, okay? So it's not just the anthocyanin pigments, there's other compounds found in berries that have anti-inflammatory activity. Next slide, Jamie. So inflammation goes hand in hand with the production of these free radical species. So that's what's beautiful about berries. They protect against oxidative stress as a result of the free radical species, and they also protect against inflammation. Next slide. I think that this one really ties it together. Even though this is a very complex slide, the take-home message: polyphenols protect against oxidative stress and inflammation. I go to a berry health benefits symposium every 2 years, and every talk that's talking about protection against whatever, metabolic syndrome, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, they talk about the two main mechanisms which the berries are protecting against these diseases as protection against oxidative stress and inflammation. So this is a fancy slide, but you can see the polyphenols act as antioxidants, so they control the production or synthesis of these free radical species. And by doing that, they inhibit these transcription factors that produce these inflammatory cytokines. Okay, so that's really a take-home message. Polyphenols protect against oxidative stress and inflammation. Next slide, Jamie. So some of the emerging areas of berry research over the last 5 years, been a lot of studies, especially with animals, that show berry consumption affords protection against metabolic syndrome and obesity, type 2 diabetes. We're seeing more and more studies that have positive effects on liver and gut health. A lot of studies show the benefits of berries against inflammation. And we're seeing more studies on bone health as well as breast cancer. Next slide. Okay, you hear a lot about the role of our gut microbiota in human nutrition. Okay, so we know what happens when we eat a Western diet, high sugar, high fat. We don't move, okay, for antibiotic abuse. What do we get? Okay, we get harmful microbiota in our gut. And this leads to leaky gut syndrome, inflammation, increased insulin resistance. Okay, so now we're talking about metabolic syndrome, obesity, diabetes, and a whole host of other chronic disorders. However, if we have a prudent diet with lots of berries, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lifestyle, we exercise, probiotics, prebiotics, okay, we change our gut microbiota, and we get much more positive effects in the gut where we don't have leaky gut. We reduce inflammation, we increase our insulin sensitivity, okay, and we have greater cardiovascular health. Next slide, Jamie. So now we go back to these tannins that are found in berries, okay? They're large compounds, so they're not going to be well absorbed in the human body. So what happens? They go to the colon, and this is where our positive gut microbiota comes into play. It can break these compounds down into very simple phenolic compounds that can be reabsorbed through the colonic wall, go back into circulation, and play health benefits. Years ago, we thought if these compounds aren't absorbed, they're just going to the colon and being excreted through the feces, that there's no health benefits. Well, that's really changed in the last 10, 15 years. Now the questions are, how does the diet impact our composition of gut microbiota? And what specific bacteria in our gut are capable of breaking down these compounds like the tannins into simple compounds that have health benefits? Because in a lot of studies, these new compounds formed by the gut microbiota are present in circulation at much higher levels than the compounds that were absorbed in the small intestine, so it's really exciting. Next slide, please. So in this one study, they found that these metabolites of those tannins in raspberries and blackberries showed potent anti-inflammatory and antioxidant capacity, okay, in the plasma. So again, it suggests that the gut microbiota can break down these large tannins into simple phenols that have a very good antioxidant capacity and anti-inflammatory activity. Next slide. Okay, so cranberries. You probably heard that cranberries can protect against urinary tract infections. Okay, so this is due to E. coli adhering to the uroepithelial cells. So it's been thought for years that the thing that's unique about cranberries is they contain a specific type of tannin. It has an A-type linkage. We won't go into that. But these tannins, if you hit enter, Jamie, you'll see these bugs start to adhere to the uroepithelial cells. So if we have these cranberries in our diet, okay, it will prevent the E. coli bacteria from adhering to the uroepithelial cells. We still don't know for sure if it is these unique procyanidins or tannins found in cranberries. It could possibly be metabolites, because we know that these tannins are poorly absorbed, so it may be that the gut microbiota are breaking down these tannins, and it's actually metabolized as a result of the gut microbiota. So there is a health claim for cranberries against UTI in Europe, specifically France, but we don't have the health claim in the US, even though there's pretty strong evidence that cranberries protect against UTI. A scientist at Maine has done studies. She says even if you drink a cranberry cocktail, a blend of cranberry with other fruit juices, she still sees protection against UTI. So that's a good thing, because cranberries are pretty rough to consume, fresh or even a pure cranberry juice. Pretty tart and astringent, right? Okay, next slide. Okay, there's a lot of studies, especially with animals, that show that berries improve motor skills and memory retention. I always love these slides. It looks like the mouse Olympics, but if you take aged mice and you feed them berries and you put them on this roto rod, the aged mice fed the berries can stay on the roto rod longer. This poor guy may have been in control. He didn't get his berries that fell down here. Same way, they can hang on the bar a lot longer if they're fed berries, okay, versus the animals that don't receive berries. Or with the Morris water maize, okay? So in terms of memory retention, this is a problem I have. Okay, so they put the mice in here and they usually pour milk. So there's this platform. So they have to learn where the platform is. Okay, so then when they put them back in, the mice that are fed berries can remember a lot better where this platform is than the mice that are not fed berries. So we're starting to see more studies too with humans that show that berries can improve motor skills and memory retention, which is pretty exciting. Next slide, Jamie. Now, there's a recent review on berry fruit consumption and metabolic syndrome, okay? So they reviewed all these dietary human intervention studies. So once again, take-home theme from this talk, all of them talk about anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects are important, okay? They see in a lot of the studies the tendency of berries to lower lipid profile, okay, total lipids and the bad cholesterol, the LDL, as well as triglycerides, although not all studies show that. Some studies show that berry consumption can attenuate reduced blood pressure, especially systolic and hypertensive subjects, but it's not observed in all studies. The studies on humans show mixed results on glucose and insulin metabolism. And this is surprising because a lot of the animal studies show very positive effects on reducing levels of glucose and increasing insulin sensitivity. The problem is with a lot of these animal studies, they're feeding a very high dose of the freeze-dried berries. And that was actually one of the major take-home messages in this review article. It's the dose, response, and intervention time are important. They tend to see more positive effects when humans are fed a higher dose of berries and when the intervention time is extended. So we probably need to be eating berries consistently in our diet in order to observe these beneficial effects. Next
Hey,
slide.
Luke, we're a little bit over time.
Okay.
Can you maybe go faster?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'll just. So yeah, we can go to the next slide.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide even. Next one. Okay, so the bioavailability, as I mentioned before, if these compounds aren't absorbed, okay, they go to the colon where they're broken down by the gut microbiota and they can go back into circulation. This is very important because the bioavailability of these polyphenols, those anthocyanin pigments, is actually quite low. Some studies show only 0.1% are absorbed in the small intestine. And then they don't like the neutral pH where they're broken down. So that's why there's a lot of interest in the role of the gut microbiota, okay? Because a lot of these compounds are not well absorbed. They're going to the colon, being broken down by the gut microbiota, okay, and back into circulation. So next slide, Jamie. So some other berries you'll hear more and more about. Chokeberry, which they, you actually have to choke them down. They don't taste all that great. We've worked with these. Elderberry, acai, lollyberry, black raspberry. Just look at the color. These things very darkly pigmented, right? So they have high levels of anthocyanins, hence they have high antioxidant capacity and high anti-inflammatory activity. And next slide, Jamie. I think we're at the end. Okay, so yes, these berries have very strong antioxidant activity, but that's not the whole story, okay? They have very potent anti-inflammatory activity. They can alter the cell signaling pathways at the molecular level, where they can alter pro-inflammatory, reduce pro-inflammatory genes and induce antioxidant genes. Importantly, especially the tannins or the compounds that are not well absorbed can alter gut microbiota. But what we really need is more research with human clinical trials in order to validate the health benefits that we've seen in numerous animal studies. So with that, I'll be happy to handle any questions you might have.
Thanks, Luke. That was great. Any questions?
I have a question. The slide said about berries taking the trace metals, copper and such.
Right.
Since vitamins contain those trace metals, are we talking about metals in food or metals in the vitamins that we take?
Well, they could be binding any food where it's a supplement you take or food intake that these flavonoids can chelate those pro-oxidant metals or any type of metal that you're consuming in your diet, whether it's a supplement or food.
And there's one other question, Luke, in the chat that says, I'm watching carbs and calories right now. What amount do you have to eat daily to get these advantages?
Okay.
Maybe talk also about the calorie content of berries.
Yeah, that's the problem, especially when you start consuming, you know, a lot of these studies, I think in that study by Dr. Pryor, it was like 5-6 cups of berries. Well, that's still a lot of calories. I mean, a serving size, you know, a cup. But yeah, you still have to deal with the calories. But the health benefits of the berries versus the caloric intake, I think still beneficial to eat the berry.
And then what about, Luke, I mean, before everyone signed on, you and Ava and I were talking about freeze-dried berries. What are other ways maybe to get a concentrated source of these, like anthocyanins, or if people want to make smoothies or things like that?
Well, I mean, with smoothies, you can just use the fresh berries. Berries are expensive. That's one drawback, and they have a short growing season, right? Go with frozen. Frozen berries retain their nutrients well, up to a year. So, using those for smoothies is a great way to go. Because we really don't sell a concentrated source like an anthocyanin extract that's been concentrated really isn't available on the market. That's why I think most people just use the freeze-dried berries. Because the one thing we haven't talked about too, excuse me, our berries are rich in fiber. So you probably don't want to do just an anthocyanin extract. This is the problem with the juice. When we make a juice, we press the juice, we get the liquid fraction, we leave all the fiber behind that doesn't make it into the juice, right? So you're better off with the whole berry, even if it's a freeze-dried berry, because you're still getting the fiber and all of the compounds that are bound to the fiber. A lot of these phenolic compounds are bound to fiber. You don't want to try and just get a juice. Some health benefits, but certainly not like in a whole fruit.
Well, here, we have it in the comments. 1 cup of berries is about 70 calories and 17 grams of carbs.
Yeah.
Any other? We've talked a lot about berries. So, and we've talked about the affordability of berries, because some of the things that make like Mediterranean diet hard to follow is the cost of some of the fresh ingredients.
Right. That's why, again, go with frozen berries. They tend to be cheaper, and the compounds are stable long term.
Yeah. Any other questions for Luke? Anyone? Well, thanks, Luke. It was a great talk. You did a good job of making the science understandable.
Hopefully. I'm not sure if I understand. Yeah, go eat your berries for lunch.
Yeah. Well, have a great day, everyone. Thank you. And thanks for reminding me to hit record.